A very good morning to everyone gathered here today. I would like to start off this event with the quote of the Islam prophet Ali Abi Talib. There is no wealth like knowledge, no poverty like ignorance. We have all gathered here today to enrich our knowledge and to learn something new that would traverse with us as we trot along the way of our vibrant life. I, Ella Vignesh, welcome our honorable chief guest of the day, Dr. Dev Mohan Mohunta, our associate dean, Dr. V. Ponuswamy, School of Chemical and Biotechnology, respected professors, alumni members, participants, and the students gathered here. The Department of Chemical Engineering at Shastra was established in the year 1994. The National Conference on Advances in Process Engineering, or CAPE, is the annual event of the Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers Shastra Students Chapter, or IICHE STEP. The objective of this conference is to provide an interdisciplinary forum for researchers, engineers to share and discuss their ideas on the emerging issues in the field of process engineering. Once again, I extend my warm welcome to the speaker of the day, Dr. Dev Mohan Mohunta, CEO of Commercial, Chemical and Development Company. Now, I kindly request my colleague, Ms. Rajashri, to introduce our chief guest of the day. Kindly proceed.
Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this invited lecture. This morning, I have the delight of introducing the guest of honor and speaker of today's occasion, Dr. Dev Mohan Mohunta. Dr. Dev Mohan Mohunta received his doctorate from Alagappa College of Technology, University of Madras in the year 1968, where he had a brief stint in teaching as well. He obtained his undergraduate from the same institute in the year 1961. He has been one of the pillars of chemical industry in India, having been associated with industry for nearly 50 years, during which he has made invaluable contributions to the overall development of industries in India. His professional work has been in the areas of innovation and development, making significant contributions like changing batch processes to continuous processes, scaling up of processes from experimental to the commercial level, and reducing the carbon footprint of plants by reducing plant size or increasing plant capacity. Some of his process-specific works in the industry include production of 16 strontium chemicals from strontium ore in Ariyalur and production of azadirachtin, a natural pesticide from neem trees, the plant for which is located in Kadalur. He has also been involved in projects to reduce VOC emissions from plants, integrated production of chemicals, and published literatures on the use and efficacy of drugs for pharma companies. He has done a remarkable contribution in the project to revive Lake Karun in Egypt. Apart from these, he served as the resource person for UNEP, UNDP, and GIZ for the phasing out of carbon tetrachloride, which is an ozone depleting substance. He has held notable positions in the past as the chairman of Indian Institute of Chemical Engineers, Chennai chapter, and also as the vice president of Chemical Industries Association, helping the Indian chemical industries move forward with innovation and development in their production. Dr. Diya Mohunta struck a balance of a stellar professional with a rich personal life as well. He loves to keep the history of the world at his fingertips and also is an avid follower of Indian tradition. He has a unique attraction towards Indian theogony and loves to ponder upon the evolution of God and goddesses in Hinduism. Once again, I welcome you all.
Thank you, Ms. Rajashri. As a token of gratitude, we would like to, with the consent of our AD, to show the memento to our chief guest. The memento will be displayed on the screen and the same will be couriered over to you, sir. Dr. Ponuswamy, sir, do we have your consent?
Yeah, go ahead.
Without further delay, I kindly request Dr. Dev Mohan Mohunta to deliver his guest lecture on knowledge-based innovation and development in chemical engineering and processing. I kindly request the participants to raise their questions through the chat box, if any. So, please proceed.
What happens is, as students, we all gather to acquire knowledge in our postgraduate and graduate this thing. And when we go to the postgraduate, we do something more than the present step of knowledge, and one more little step forward in the knowledge of our chosen field. And that is what, when we apply this knowledge into other fields, we get insights and find solutions. Now, when you leave this when the students will leave this college, they will be going into industry or any other courses. And then the new type of skills take over. You have to have different type of skills with in different domains, connected with your technical knowledge that you acquired in learning. So if you look at it, learning is a lifelong process and it never stops. If you stop it, your career also stops. Now, just to start about the presentation starts with my own start in the professional life and how it shaped my future. Acquisition of knowledge and applying it became the lifelong process. So you start with, let's say, doing a literature survey, so that's the gaining knowledge. And then I use this idea of literature survey into so many diversified activities, like something not connected with the chemical engineering at all, producing medical literature on drugs so that a dossier can be processed, prepared for the physicians. I had to learn so many things about the medical terms, finding sources, and I had to find the sources of information on medical information on all types of drugs and diseases. Then I started on another area, another knowledge area of patent searching, which is important for me even today. And then I got some jobs based on this, like I made a monograph on phosgenes chemistry, its safety, etc., engineering plastics, and their future for one of the leading South Indian groups. And all these things led to something or one thing or other. The Bhopal tragedy, I separately investigated the Bhopal tragedy on behalf of the in our association. And that led me into an entirely new field of safety and hazards, investigation into chemical accidents, and etc. Now, in the talk which I am going to give now, I am mentioning the area of innovation and application of knowledge, my experience in that, then the advances in chemical engineering, and a little about things that may affect the future. Now, after taking the course, how did I start? We started taking in-plant training, which was compulsory in those days. And as a trainee, we were simply given some jobs, finding out the efficiency of number of ion exchange beds, because there is a softening plant, what is the total raw water consumption for a very large plant, what are the losses of major raw materials through the exhaust, putting into operation a rotary filter, which I had never seen in my life earlier. There's no help. You're on your own. And then, during this time, there was a shortage of staff and I was put on shift as a trainee. There was only a trainee, there was not a job. And on the first day, first shift, when I restarted the plant, there was a small explosion in the electrical part. I was really worried, but then they said, no, it's all okay, it's all heavy, don't worry about it. I was offered a job, was given a higher pay, and left after a few months to do my master bench search. This 6 months, I learned the importance, and you will also learn it, the importance of planning and timely completion of any job. And as far as the industry is concerned, the losses that can happen if there are delays. It's quite different from the academic world, which is a go slow word and doesn't really matter whether you took a few months more or less. And then what I took was from all these questions, that we did work on all these things and gave the answers, is never be afraid of a challenge. Learn how to meet it and find out the tools to meet it. And then I went on to my master's. I had some admissions in foreign universities, but my guide, Dr. Ladda, who's the late Dr. Ladda, prevailed upon me. I did my PhD, and it was a very troublesome time because it took, instead of 2 or 3 years, I took almost 4 years because I got into a lot of problems. But however, the thesis was, my guide was very clear. You can't submit a thesis unless it is a clear step forward in the field of knowledge. Otherwise, you can't get your PhD. Now, with that thing, I had to work a lot. Ultimately, of course, the papers were very good. They published, and they are quoted to this day in encyclopedias, books, and cited in many papers in different fields like fermentation, even blast furnaces. Therefore, it is necessary one should pursue knowledge continuously and apply it. And I'll give you an example. Where a small amount of knowledge has such a ripple effect on the whole thing. In 1969, that was my final year graduation, we were asked to do a small experiment. We were asked to make nitrobenzene using nitric acid with mixed acid. We started the experiments, but our Professor Delekeshwan came and informed, stop these experiments. Such a plant of Eastman Kodak had exploded. So this remained in my mind and we went on with our life. But I kept this in mind. Many years later, somebody studied the Turner diagram of nitrobenzene, water, nitric acid, and found that if there was no water, it forms an explosive mixture. Now, remembering that TNT also, trinitotoluene, was also the first explosive developed by Nobel, let's come to another factor which I saw. I had to go to the cordite factory around Kadu where they make nitrocellulose. Nitrocellulose is used as a propellant in ammunition. And all the shine in your shoes is the nitrocellulose lacquer. There are others, like nitroglycerine, PETN, RDX, etc. Now what happens is, nitrocellulose has a shelf life, it decomposes very, very slowly over a period of time. A factory in Ranipet making NC lacquers that was shut down for a long time, for a few years, burnt down. There was no fire, there was no power, there was nothing. And the stock of NC had gradually decomposed. So when you look at this, then what happens? Nitrobenzene, nitrotoluene, all known things, nothing is going to happen. It's all very common. Yet, we find that explosion has taken place. So again, we kept on studying the whole thing. And finally found out that ammunition that is stored for a long time becomes dangerous because of this breakdown of the nitro compounds. And hundreds and thousands of tons of ammunition are dumped every year into the sea by the army once the time expires. I mean, I don't know if you know this thing. Now, TNT is used in aerial bombs. One of those, you would have heard of Balakot. Now, if the bomb is not used for years, the TNT shrinks and it no longer uniformly fills the bomb, and the accuracy of the trajectory of the bomb is lost. Now, this is something which started with a small way back in 1961 in the AC College. What about non-explosives like nitrobenzene, mononitron? We know they are not explosives. But here, just a few years back, a mononitrotoluene plant exploded. Millions of dollars in damage. In fact, part of the distillation column traveled 300 meters, weighing about 3 to 4 tons. it exploded when restarted. The cause was by mistake. Mononitrotoluene was kept over 3 to 6 months at a moderate temperature of 80 to 90 degrees. Some steam valve was kept leaking and that decomposed and became explosive. Coming to 2020, a national lab, this is again part of a consultancy job. A national lab proposed nitration using mixture of acetic acid instead of sulfuric acid and nitric acid. The main reason was that instead of sodium sulfate, you will get a sodium acetate, which is a more valuable product. When I investigated, I said there's a stage of explosion may take place, and therefore the idea was dropped. So now, what is in the long term? What is the knowledge gained? This whole, how many years have gone through? 40 plus 20, 60 years. And due to this, keep in mind that there is an inherent instability of nitro compounds. Ammonium nitrate is another thing which is a fertilizer, very common fertilizer. When mixed with any hydrocarbon, it may be lubricating oil, it can be anything, diesel, anything. It becomes shock sensitive and explosive. This was not known 60, 70, 80 years back. The harbor of Galveston Harbor was blown up, including the city of Galveston. And a plant belonging to BASF, the entire plant, about 10 or 10 square kilometers, was blown up in Germany in 1920s. They didn't realize the reason was that hydrocarbon with ammonium nitrate is an explosive. Today it is used as an explosive, but in a safe manner. So this is where a small knowledge can lead you. Now the question came, I have finished my PhD. What do I do? So we looked at, as you spoke in the introduction, I looked at strontium nitrate. There was no other manufacturer of strontium nitrate in India. It gives red color to fireworks. And I came to know that the ore was available in Aryarur in small quantities. I went back to my library and to my physical chemistry and went through the process. There was no lab. I did not have a lab in my house. So that was back in 1969-70. I got some small amount from my father and used the kitchen as a laboratory and did the process. The quality was better. We gave it to some outside testing and then the quality was better. A small scale industry was set up and it was later expanded. I realized this strategic importance when in 1970 war imports were cut off. It is a necessary ingredient in tracer bullets. So because of the very small size of my production, we produced every day 50 kgs per day to military specifications and sent it per day by a personal courier who will take it all the way from Chennai to Aronkadu. Later on, of course, we went into bigger things like a nitric acid plant and sodium nitrate plant, all were set up at Ambattur without any foreign collaboration or imported equipments. It was all done by us. It was a great learning experience without seeing an existing nitric acid plant and without knowing what is automation. Now this is a 73-74 plant. This is the control panel for the plant. What things we learned during this time? Again, you see, I come back to the point that we have to keep on learning things and doing things. I had taught a course, semester course on material of construction at AC College. So I knew about the metallurgy of steel and the mechanism of corrosion. I had learned that during this nitric acid business, that if ammonia is a feed for nitric acid, it must contain 2% water to avoid stress corrosion cracking of steel. I also learned to, we finished that one evaporator was completely cracked up. Boiling nitrate solutions. If it is cold, nothing happens. But if it is a boiling nitric acid solution, ordinary steel will crack up in a few months' time. So this was another lesson to be learned. Another peculiar thing about nitric acid I learned was, even in a heat exchanger, the nitric acid is on one side of the pipe and the water is on the other side. Yet it gets corroded if it contains chloride. Now these are the things which we'll keep on learning when you go into any field. However, I must come to one thing, that we had to give up the entire thing. At some point, I had to give it up. And making a comment here is that it was not easy to set up an industry and run it. There is no ease of business. Even today, there is no ease of business. And corruption and political influence is ever present, as I always been. There is no change. This is my 60 years in the industry. So I gave it up, the whole thing for good, sold my company, sold the company and all that, and became a consultant. Now, when I became a consultant, then my idea was I should do innovative work. I will not do simply somebody says, you do a drawing of some exchanger or make something. I was not interested in that. But then, if you are starting as innovation, you must realize that as a student or as a staff in any institution or any factory, you are the generator of an idea, but somebody has to help you and somebody has to promote the whole thing. And it's not easy. The path of innovation is a lot of delays, disappointments, frustration, and failures. This must be psychologically, you must be prepared for this. The generator is maybe a student or anybody who creates a new idea and shows that it will be useful, it will give profits. The mentor is, you have to have somebody in the organization or somebody who will help you and say, it's a good idea, come on, encourages you and all those things. And maybe tell you, these are the mistakes you are making and all those things. Then comes the promoter. The promoter and mentor may be the same or different. He has to tell the boss or boss's boss, sir, this is a good idea, we can spend 5 lakhs or 5 crores or whatever it is, why not we do it? And that is the way you have to have. Now, somewhere in this whole picture, the question of money comes up. It requires that you have the knowledge and skill to convert the technical idea into quantitative, because immediately the question will be asked, what it is going to cost, how much is going to cost, what is the operating cost. If today our cost is so much, tomorrow what will be the cost? All these things will come to you. You may not be aware of it, but then the mentor or the promoter will help you in this case, or you got to take outside help. Now this is the real, if you are doing any innovative work in your life, this will be a very useful lesson for you. I'll give you a few case studies where there's a column, I will come to later on in this thing, what is called a high gravity packed absorption desorption column. Invention by Professor Ramshaw of ICI. He was in ICI and then became University of Newcastle. He did not get much encouragement in ICI. And the idea was, for 20 years, nobody bothered about it. Then Professor Gardner of Case Western University went for a year to the University of Beijing. He had to do something in Beijing University, so he took a model with him. The Chinese took it up and made a model that there were certain mechanical issues they took over. The first thing was deoxygenate water, apply vacuum through the system and remove the water down to 100 ppm. Deoxygenate water, apply vacuum through the system and remove the water down to 100 ppm or less. 95%, 98% removal of dissolved oxygen. Now, earlier it was being done. So you had a 30-meter high column, 1 or 2 meters diameter, and you applied vacuum and all those things. The high-G machine is only 1 meter diameter. This is the beginning of an entirely new set of operating procedures, and I mean, you can call it a type of unit operations, but then this was what is happening. What happens is, this is absolutely necessary. Deoxygenation is absolutely necessary when doing oil well explorations and boiler feed water power plants. So you can imagine the amount of time and discouragement which you got. Another case in which you get into trouble was, and this is another two big companies. Nitric acid is concentrated from 62 to 98%. If you read your books, they will say add sulfuric acid and distill it and you will get nitric acid. Of course, if you practically see that dilute acid, sulfuric acid should be reconcentrated. It's a very troublesome process and expensive by heating. Now, another idea which came to DuPont. They said, why not add potassium nitrate or sodium nitrate to this one and use this salting out effect to see whether this acid can this one. They tried a few nitrates and then left it at that. But another company, Hercules, in the same town, used magnesium nitrate and was successful in concentrating the acid. The dilute acid is magnesium nitrate is reconcentrated, reused. The process was developed at the same time by ICI. Now, this story is, you might have heard of the Chilton-Colburn equation. So this story has been narrated by Chilton. I'll give you not from chemical engineering, but Xerox. What happens is sometimes you have an idea which is very good, but not implementable because of various reasons. One of the, for example, Xerox, patented, very good, but commercially was not successful initially as the ink was not good. Within a month or two, the ink would fade out. It took almost 9 years, that is about half of the patent life, to develop a reliable ink. Skill of the inventor is in transferring images, but not in making ink. And even after taking help from so many sources, it took 9 years to develop. And let me tell you my own experience. 6 months after the Xerox patent expired, so many other Xerox machines came into the market. There are many other cases in the chemical industry where the reaction could be done, but they had to wait until a proper MOC was available so that it could be done in bulk. It's a very interesting case of Intel. I mean, why I'm giving you all these things, there can be many issues when you go into innovation. Intel was making DRAM. The microprocessor which we know today, it was developed for a Japanese company under contract. The resultant patent was owned by a Japanese company. But the engineering team, the youngsters, thought, sir, it is a good idea, why not we purchase it? That's all, it's a good idea. Nobody knew how much and what it can do. Anyway, one of the Japanese engineers working in Intel was able to persuade his boss's boss, and finally they purchased the patent. The seller of the patent also didn't know what was the future of this one. The forecast within Intel did not include the 286 microprocessor, the beginning of the present microprocessor. So somewhere along the line, there is changes and take place. So this is the whole situation when you do innovation. You can get into a lot of trouble. This just gives you some idea where you can get into trouble, but don't get disappointed, don't get frustrated. I have done the same thing this is my case. We made a pilot plant for recovering carbon disulfide from waste gases. We gave a technology demonstration to the company, one big group. After that, After spending something like 15 to 20 lakhs, there was no answer, nothing. The management has changed. We had no information, no contacts. After a few years, somebody gives a call and said, I have seen those results, we are interested. Please give the pilot plant demonstration again. We did it again. And then we got the consultancy work. This pilot plant was only 60 cubic meters, but the main plant was 45,000 cubic meters per hour. This is where our knowledge came in. The knowledge we gained in our college, the knowledge we gained from books, the knowledge we gained from our experience. This included operator training, startup, and operating manuals. You see, in next slide, you will see this is the plant. This one tower is a 3-meter diameter and 35-meter height. The other tower is 1.8 meters, 45 meters height, entirely designed by us. Mechanical, process design, piping, everything was done by us. But then there's a gap of few years between our idea and getting the thing into hardware. I'll give you the other thing about, we spoke in the introduction about azadirachtin. The same idea happened with the company that somebody said, sir, it's a good idea, we should, neem is available in India, we should do it, and then the company purchased the German patent. The patent described a few grams of the seed were crushed and extracted with a mixed solvent. And it was found that AZ had a long shelf life and all that. The pilot plant was constructed and they extracted it. And they got a lot of small quantities of products and all that, which were tested and all that. But then how to go to the next stage? How to bring it to production? And what should be the capacity, etc. Now that problem was referred to us because for 3 years or 4 years, they were only doing pilot plant, but didn't know how to progress to the next stage of commercialization. When it came to me, there is no precedent, nothing to copy from. Absolutely nothing. This would be the first plant in the world. That is where the application of knowledge comes in. We asked the right questions, we found out the answers, a few experiments were done mostly, and so we learned how to preserve the neem seed. Neem may be very good for medicines, medical this thing, but neem catches fungus. And once it catches fungus, it gets aflatoxins and it becomes a poison to human beings. Now disposing of, and we had so many other questions to be found out. Anyway, the question was, we started with 30 tons, end up with 90 kgs. And we had to do the entire, I mean, if you are going to design, you have to tell the company that, look here, you want 100 kilowatts of power, you want so much of cooling water, so much of refrigeration, all that had to be done. All that was done. So again, there's a case of knowledge and application of knowledge. The plant is operational. I think it's more than 10, 15 years. Cost about 18 crores. Now, when you come to this is one thing. The other part is conceptualizing. Somebody gives you an idea, can we do this? Do that. Then you have to come back with some ideas, come back with the whole thing. Now, this came to us through a British, actually we are not the main consultant, it was a British consultant. And he wanted, and that was, there's a Lake Karun, is about 80 kilometers south of Cairo, which is become salty day by day. I mean, year by year. So they said how to prevent it. If the entire becomes salt, I mean, like sea salt, 3% salt, then the whole area becomes dead. It's agriculture area, the entire agriculture area will go dead. So one suggestion came that we should recover all the salts from the lake, and now all the salts means how much do you recover? What is the salt balance? How do you do it and all those things? So this was all done. Again, there was a learning process. Where do the salts come from? Where do they go? How much is the rate of evaporation? What is the rate of evaporation? This was all that was a new learning process for me. What are the quantifications that take into account all these parameters that go into this finding out the base. The base was how much salt to be removed per year and what are the salts to be removed per year. You could get a lot of information, and if you want to know how much evaporation, then what is the surface area of the lake? That's from where the evaporation will take place. So that time we used a satellite image of the lake from NASA and got the help of Institute of Remote Sensing in Anna University to give us the calculation, the total surface area of the lake, from which the water will be evaporating. Again, the question of what is the volume of the lake, because you have to make a material balance for the lake. So we developed all those things. And then we came to the chemical analysis, which was done by a laboratory in India with the help of Central Salt Research Institute. And then we found out area of the lake was so much. This is the volume of the lake, 1,000 billion cubic meters. The quantity of salts is there. And what is the salts? There's already a plant recovering some sodium sulfate and sodium chloride, and the remaining salts are so much. So this is the new plant will have to be designed for this. Now, this is what we have to recover every year to keep the salt balance. So next was, how do you go about it? Recovering of all these materials and all that, you have to boil, you have to evaporate and all that, but then it's going to be costly. So we learned that if you have cogeneration of power, usually ordinary power plants, what we have in Ennore or any Tuticorin or any place, have got 33% efficiency. Whereas if you generate steam and power and use steam and power in any ratio, then the thermal efficiency of the whole plant goes up beyond 84%. And that brings down the cost of the power and steam also. So with this idea and lot of work had to be done. Again, first time, no precedents. We even estimated the cost of the project at 410 million. And that is a big exercise to be done. You can see now with this, in this graph, you'll see we are making vacuum salt, sodium sulfate, magnesium chloride, bromine, sodium metal, magnesium metal, calcium carbide, yellow phosphorus, caustic soda, phosphoric acid, so many things. And a huge power plant, 300 tons of steam per hour and 174 megawatts of power. Now this is something which I have to imagine and do it. The report was accepted by the Egyptian government. So far, partly it has been done. See, this is a conceptualization of this one. Now we come to another part of this thing is what are the advances that have taken place in the field of chemical engineering, and specifically I will refer to something called process intensification. This is the application of conventional chemical engineering knowledge. That is our knowledge of heat transfer, mass transfer, all those things, turbulence and this and that and everything. But use it in an unconventional manner. Means not in the normal way, but use it that look here. If it's a viscous liquid, there's a boundary layer. That boundary layer must be broken up and disturbed, so to improve the heat transfer. So similar situations will come. You have to use this knowledge in an unconventional manner. This was again a phrase coined by Professor Ramshaw at the University of Wisconsin. The aim of this whole strategy is to optimize capital. That means minimum capital for maximum production, energy, environment, safety, by reducing the size of the plant. In other words, by definition, a chemical engineering development that leads to a substantially smaller, cleaner, and more energy efficient technology is process intensification. I'll give you, in fact, there are courses run in other universities on process intensification. It is not possible to give you the entire field of it, but I'll give you some flavor of it. So we start. First is you look at why the process is slow, why can't we make it faster? That is a question, fundamental question to be asked. Now we may have to invent hardware that overcomes these constraints. And there are new methodologies. For example, one are compact heat exchangers, structured packed columns, static mixers, high-G, spinning disks. A huge number of equipments have been invented. Microchannel reactors and all those things have been invented to improve make it faster, cleaner, better conversions. The other area is methodology. Reactive distillation, reactive extraction, membrane separations, various other types of things are done. And use of microwave or centrifugal fields or supercritical liquids, all these are required this one. The other is moving from batch to continuous reactor systems. Using the same kinetic data which you develop in the laboratory and moving into this idea of process intensification. Now I'll give you a few examples of things. This is a static mixer. That means you don't require a stirrer, a motor, all that is not required. Just pass the two mixture liquids through this through the tube, and these mixing elements will do the job. These mixing elements will do the job. Similarly, you've got different types of mixing elements, and they can do it. You can mix 100:1, even 100:1, 1000:1 also can be mixed in these things. This is another idea that you can do the reaction, adding materials at the same time, doing the reaction. So the mixing takes place, the reaction takes place where the mixing is there. You can add one stream here, you can add the other stream here, the main stream can be added here, and all sorts of combinations are available to you depending on the kinetics. Here is the case. You see, if you have seen any effluent treatment plant, the effluents may come from different parts of this thing. They are brought into a single tank where there is a huge mixer with a motor. And you mix all the things so that a uniform this thing is, then it goes into the treatment area. Whereas here, if you use the static mixer, there's no need for a motor and this one. It's just the mixing of the channel. In the channel itself, mixing takes place. You must be knowing about plate heat exchangers. I have used extensively plate exchangers to save space and all those things. And the plate exchangers, you see, one of the things is, what is the difference you can approach the two streams? Two streams which you can approach can be less than 5 degrees centigrade away. Much lower internal volume. Earlier models were all liquid, now they are liquid plus vapor also. The total, actually value-wise also, the cost-wise also, the shell, it is much cheaper than the shell and tube heat exchanger. This is a totally new concept. Printed circuit heat exchangers. On the plate itself, you etch the channels through which the liquid will pass. One liquid goes like this, the other liquid goes like this. So the liquid will pass through that. Now these are etched into this one, and these plates are put together by diffusion bonding, by pressing and heating, the plates are put together. Now this becomes a very, very high efficiency, about 20 times more better heat exchanger than shell and tube. In fact, if you look at this one, it can be used as a reactor. It has been used also for small scale methanol reforming to hydrogen. You see, you take methanol and crack it up, so you will get hydrogen, and this has been used as a reactor. Then offshore platforms where very large volumes of heat have to be taken out. Now this is an example which saves that per platform. If you use this PHE, you can save $30 billion. This is an example of an oscillating reactor. I mean, you have a long tube like this with baffles, and you have oscillations. Now this is very interesting. It has been invented in the University of Newcastle and gives you very good results for certain type of reactions. This is a case of high-speed mixer. I mean, if you have gone to some industry, you will notice that you have got ribbon blenders. Almost everybody uses ribbon blenders. Now this has got some paddles here, and it is high speed, very high speed. The result is, if you take a batch of 500 kgs or 250 kgs, the mixing time is only 5 minutes. Now this is being manufactured in India also, and the reason for, and basically those people who are making snacks, they are using it. Another one has been how do you heat and cool tar in a refinery? It's a thick material and all those things. So here is a new type of invention in which the tar will go up this way, get heated up, but along with the tar you are adding some wire cutting and beads along with that. Now that keeps the surface clean. Here it goes to a cyclone separator, the beads and all come down, and the clean tar goes up here. Now the difference is this: 24,000 surface area, 4,600 surface area. Here you require such a huge amount of power, you require less power, and every month it has to be cleaned. There is no cleaning for the whole year. This is the case of Hygie. Just taken a lot of this thing. In India, the major development has been at the university, at IIT Kanpur by Professor Rao. Here you have a rotating packed bed. So you have a liquid feed, you have a liquid outlet, you have vapor inlet, you have vapor inlet from this rotating, so the rotating this one, then this mixes up here, and then it comes out. This is a supporting disc. Actually, this is the disc on which this packed bed is put. Packed bed is actually a very fine mesh. Actually, it's not the usual packed bed which you think of, some packings and all that. And the result is that the small units will have as much as 30, 40, 50, 60 theoretical trays. Here is I was speaking of the deaerator. So here is a photograph of a deaerator made in India. This is your actual deaerator. This is the actual deaerator. The rest is all the equipment for putting in and taking out. This is done in India. This is again a plant which has been put up in HPCL Vizag. This replaces a tower of 1.8 meter diameter and 20 meters height. Again, the same idea in a small way for CO2 absorption in ethanol amide solutions. That means it replaces a tower which is about 18 meters height. Reactions can be done in this high G also and other things in various types of reactors and very fast. Before I come to this reaction, this high G reactor, the contact times are so low that you can make calcium carbonate, precipitated calcium carbonate nano size. The same thing can be done. In fact, the Chinese have adopted this in a big way, and we are importing this nano calcium carbonate from China. And although we have the technology, we are not producing this nano calcium carbonate. Here, when you have the reactions, what has happened when you have this intensification? The reaction rate goes up by 60 to 260 times. See, in this any esterification, water has to be removed. If you remove the water, the reaction rate is 260 times. If you do not remove the water, it is 60 times the normal reaction rate which you would find in ordinary batch reactors. This is a selection of, you see again, the type of reactors change. This is a micro reactor. I'll show you some photographs. These are a huge number of reactions have been done. These are micro reactors which will take about 1 liter per hour, 2 liters per hour of flow. They are all heat exchanger, everything is there inside it. Very, very efficient, and the benefits of high conversions are there. So, when you come to this one, the reactive distillation is another area of high heat. One of the things which you might have heard also is methyl acetate. See, the idea of methyl acetate was this. When you make methyl acetate, you will see the next slide. There are something like 8 columns or 9 columns, but now it has been replaced by a single column. The reason for this is that if you recognize that in a tray, each tray has become a reactor. Because this is stagnant, there's a liquid layer in it, and then it has become. Once you recognize that, then it becomes easy to design this thing. So you've got multiple reactors in one distillation column. The distillation column goes on, it's a single column. I have seen this also, like the ethyl acetate also, we can use, but here there is a very idea that ethyl acetate, when you make, you require sulfuric acid or sulfonic acid or something like that as a catalyst. Whereas this uses ion exchange, acidic ion exchange resins as a catalyst. The catalyst itself is circulated in the bottom section of the column. What it does is it saves about 40% energy. This is what we did long time back. See, you are doing thionyl chloride chlorination of some, it's a very common thing to do in organic chemistry. And we carried out the reactions in a 5-liter flask and all those things, found out the rates and all that. But then what we did was, a plant was already operating. What we did was we designed a loop reactor. We designed a loop reactor. The reason for designing that loop reactor was that we could increase. So we designed a small loop reactor. First it was a batch. First it was a batch reaction was done. From that kinetic data, we could design the loop reactor. And when we designed the loop reactor, the productivity of the per reactor volume was 340 kg per hour per cubic meter of the reactor volume. Whereas the batch reactor was 10 kg per hour per cubic meter. In fact, for getting the same production, existing plant was 18 3 reactors of 6 cubic meters each were being used. Now this could be reduced to a single reactor of 0.5 cubic meter, a volume reduction of nearly 36 times. Now this is the benefit of this intensification. I think there may not be sufficient time to go for more of this one, so I just now come to another subject. What is the new frontiers? Deep eutectic. Have you heard of deep eutectic? I don't know. Anyway, the point is you have two substances, high melting point, choline chloride. It was a discovery by Professor Abbott and his students. Melting point 302 degrees and urea melting point 133. When mixed in a ratio 1:2, the melting point is only 12 degrees centigrade. That means it's a liquid at normal temperature. The question at that time was, what do we do with this? Anyway, the question was choline chloride is produced in very large quantities. So no fear that choline chloride is produced, and urea is of course millions of tons of fertilizer. Now, what is the use of this? So much work has been done on this that 3 types of deep eutectics are recognized, and you can see here these eutectics have got a melting point from 60 degrees centigrade to minus 30 degrees centigrade. So if you have choline chloride, you can have with oxalic acid or malonic acid or ethylene glycol or glycerol or fructose and all that have got certain uses. And the uses have to be developed. I mean, in fact, it's an open thing now for any research to be done. And a lot of research is being done on this subject, where it has been used. Now, these are ionic liquids. I mean, ions can pass from one side to another. So they have been used as an electrochemical fluid. So you can do chromium plating, silver plating, electropolishing. See, electropolishing is something. Suppose you have a stainless steel vessel, even your own household vessels. It has to be buffed and finished. No, it's not necessary. Just dip it into this thing, and it gets a bright polish in a few minutes' time. And then you are not using any acidic baths, no sulfuric acid, no chromium sulfate, chromium dichromate and all those things. It is all this thing. And then there's a point of power. A lot of power is wasted in this, in acid baths and all that. That power is saved. Another potential application, and which is going to be in a very large scale, is the preparation of biomass for various uses. See, in a biomass, you take straw or wood or anything. The cellulose is stuck together by lignins. Now, some of these deep eutectics, the lignin can be dissolved out, leaving the cellulosic part separately, which makes things very easier for processing. That means the cellulose can then be converted into sugars. Saccharification of biomass becomes easy. The pulping becomes easy. You see, there's a huge project being funded, about 10 or 15 million euros project is there being funded for the pulp and paper industry, where they want, you see, the whole cost in making pulp is to remove this lignin out of this whole mass of wood and get the cellulose out of it. Now that is something for which the industry is doing a lot of research on this one. I think this is the area where we can also contribute to something. And there are so many other dozens of developments in analytical chemistry, various other types of reactor systems and all that. But most of them are at a stage, the laboratory stage. They have to be taken to a commercial stage or a semi-commercial stage. In fact, this part has been taken to a commercial stage, chromium plating. Silver plating is very simple. You have silver chloride in the bath, in this DES bath. If you add any material like copper, the copper layer will partly dissolve in this bath, and the silver will get plated onto this one. No need to pass any power or anything. So this is one big development that has taken place, and I think I'm just bringing it to your notice. The other thing is now we are talking of solar power and wind energy. What happens is when you talk of solar power and wind energy, how do you store it during the non-production time? Solar is in daytime, wind is only when wind comes. So the system will use batteries. Now, if I use batteries, lead acid batteries, lithium-ion batteries and all those things, very, very expensive stuff. The cost is very high, and there's a life. The battery has to be one day or other thrown away after some 10 years or something, and all that. Now, what has happened is a new type of battery has arrived where there's a liquid flow in the the electrolyte is a liquid. So when the electrolyte is a liquid, you have two electrolytes. One is on the cathode and one is the anode side. So this circulating liquid is what catches the power and keeps it in this one. I'll come to the next slide. This is the end of the thing. Yeah. So what happens is, you have got the negolite, it is called electrolytic, and you have got the positive. So this contains the charge. So what is required is now big tanks containing the charged liquids. When you pump the two together through a electrode bipolar or semi-permeable membranes and all that, then power is generated. Instead of power source, suppose you connect the solar power or if you connect the solar power or wind energy or anything, then this is reversed. So the charge, what has been discharged can go up. So now that way, the system has been developed. Now commercial systems are available for 500 to 1000 kilowatts so far, and that will take discharge in 5 to 6 hours. So 5 to 6 hours you can store 500 to 1000 kilowatts in liquid. Now the question is, how much liquid you can have? Any quantity of liquid you can have 100 cubic meters, 10 cubic meters or 20 cubic meters, and you can store any amount. Now this has become one of the major ideas that has come in along with this one. Why I came into this picture was the manufacture of this negolite and posilite is being done in India, partly being done in India. Now they are actively, foreign companies are actively sourcing this negative electrolyte and positive electrolytes from India. That is how I came into the picture. I think that gives you an idea where we are leading to. There are so many other things. I think we've taken enough time. And I think that would give you an idea that what will be the next stage of your development, or if you're doing R&D or anything, you could think of these new lines of thinking. But it's not the end of the thing. Today, even an old packed column, how many varieties of packings are there? And there is still scope for making new type of packings that are easy to fabricate, cheaper to make and fabricate, and give you the same results or better results than what are available from the present set of packings, whether it is Sulsar or any other company. I think with that, I think I've spent enough time on it. Yeah, now more than enough. Now coming to the end point, it is why are these things we talked about called intensification and all those things not being adopted? One is people are not aware of the concept. Another is all this new or mechanically new processes, mechanically new things. We are not used to it. And people who have been spent 10 years and 20 years and 30 years in the chemical industry are very doubtful whether this will work or not. It will be a waste of investment and all that. So now, this is the issue, and I hope with what I have done and said so far, new ideas will come, and then there will be many changes that will come through. I think with this I will end the thing and come to the point of questions.
Sir, there are a few questions in the chat box. May I have the privilege of reading them out, or would you prefer to do it yourself, sir?
One second. I am not very familiar with all this business.
Okay.
1 second.
Yes, sir.
No, you can read it out. One second.
Okay, sir.
One minute. I've got my... Where is the chat box? Okay, you let me know.
Okay, sir. So may I read it out now? Or
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
want to? Yes, sir. So the first question is from Hariharan Shivakumar, which reads, I am Hariharan, a master's graduate currently living in Australia. I want to become an entrepreneur and consultant in the future. I have two questions for you.
Yes.
First question, sir, you had started your own plant and later sold it. Can you please give me some points on how you managed to raise funds for the starting of the plant?
Well, the point was I got somebody like a venture capitalist. One venture capitalist was my father-in-law. But there were others. But that funding was not enough. We went in for a public issue. With the help of some financiers and all that, but we went in for a public issue, and that is the reason for raising the funds. But then if you want to raise from public issue, you must have a proper project already ready, which shows profitability on paper and will show it when you are operating it. If that is not there, you can't go for a public issue, you have to go for a venture capital system. The venture capital, as far as I was concerned, the venture capital was provided by, of course, my father-in-law partly, but there were others also, relatives and others who said, look here, we are willing to take a risk of, in those days, I'm talking of 71, 72, okay, we'll take a risk of 1 lakh rupees or 2 lakh rupees, and we are with you. So that is what happened. If I had lost the whole thing, yes, my relatives all would, I don't know what they would have done to me, but anyway, that's the point. Tell me. Yeah.
The second question that follows it is, when you started your own consultancy, what steps did you take to get the attraction of clients to approach to your company?
Yeah, that's a good thing. What happened is I didn't know anybody. I mean, my contacts were with a very close number of people. So what I did was, I advertised in some of these papers what I could do. Some of these magazines, like Chemical Weekly, or some of the Chemical Weekly is a common magazine in India, goes to almost all chemical industries and all that. Similarly, I took part in some exhibitions. But then when you do this, you have to prepare a certain amount of material that you can offer to others. What can you offer on the table? What you can do? So I said, I could do energy conservation for you. I could do this or that or something like that, or prepare project reports and all those things. When the question came of energy conservation, I can tell you, I have done energy conservation for a 5-star hotel. Oh, I won't believe it. A 5-star hotel is a huge consumer of energy, and the profitability of a 5-star hotel depends on saving the maximum possible energy. So this is what we did. And this belonged to this Trident group, Trident Hotels. We did it here. We looked at all the factors, air conditioning, hot water. You see what happens is these hot water systems and then laundry and other things. How do we save the money on those things? And I think we did a decent job of it. And we could save a lot of this thing. This was one area where we worked on it, that we could save you money on heating and energy savings. There are a lot of factors in energy savings. And if you look at in the nitric acid plant, for example, which we put up nitric acid sodium plant, we reduced the steam consumption by 80%. We were having waste steam. We used the waste steam in such a manner and all those things that ultimately we could get enough boiler feed water. We had a DM plant for making water, but which was operated every shift. Now we did not have, we were operating after some time only at once in 3 days. It was operated to make up the feed water. The other was fuel in the boiler. By doing all these heat exchangers and things like that, we could save 80% of the fuel in the boiler. We had problems in the boiler that how to operate the boiler off and on. So it was changed over to an automatic small boiler in one corner, occupying about 8 feet by 8 feet space. That's all. The big boiler was sold away. So there's a lot of scope for exchanging heat and all those things in heat transfer and heat one. There's a lot of scope available. Anybody who studies the entire process will come up with some answers.
Yes, sir. So the next question is from Akila K. It reads, Sir, as you mentioned, a lot of your experimental set was based upon trial and error, and there were times you did not get the desired results. What kept you motivated to keep trying despite those dejections?
No, let me tell you one thing. As far as the laboratory trials are concerned, there were only minor setbacks because in those days we did not have Google or anything to search. We had to go to the chemical abstracts. And we had to spend a lot of time in this one. For example, when I did this strontium nitrate business, see, there are many issues come up which we don't recognize at that time, because when you do it, yes, the reaction is there. I wanted to make strontium chromate. Yes, react with the strontium chloride or chloride with some chromate salt, sodium chromate, and you get it, but we did not get it. Then went back and found out that it forms an hydroxyapatite. That means there is a SROH twice group also getting added up. It is in the literature. So we had to change the pH. We have to keep a watch on the pH so that we don't get into that hydroxyapatite, hard mass, unfilterable, very difficult to dry and all that. Okay, right. So these are disappointments which must be prepared for it, but be prepared to get an answer for it. I mean, don't simply say it's a failure and then close down the whole thing. No, you have to find a solution to the failures. That's the whole thing. You see, one thing I'll tell you, I have seen projects failing and I have seen projects prospering in spite of all the problems. Basically, it is the attitude of the company and the people. One company may say, oh, this has happened, it's not going to work. There are other companies say, what is the solution? Let us find out the solution. I had both experiences. In one company, let me tell you, we gave them the design. It is absorption, desorption, everything. It was supposed to recover about 2 tons per day. When it started up, it recovered only 300 kgs per day. A big disappointment for everybody. And they told me, what is this? You're supposed to recover 2 tons. You're recovering only 300 kgs. So I went back to my calculations and found out this is where it came in that the equilibrium data which we had got from literature was wrong. Fortunately for us, we could get this information from Bayer Technologies that this is the actual equilibrium data, not what you followed up. With that, we told them, sir, this is the design changes minor changes to be done, but this is required and then it will work. Today, that plant is giving them 10 crores profit per year, 10 or 12 crores profit per year. That was a setback. Now the management could have told us, oh, you are a failure, get out. The management had faith in us and said, look here, find a solution and we'll be with you. After all, for a 4 crore plant, we spent hardly another 10 or 15 lakhs. And we set it right. So this is an issue that comes up in organizations. That do you want to make it a failure or do you want to make it a success? There, of course, failures are there, but that's quite different. Because if you look at the Western world, please note that for every gigantic success, there will be 20 major failures. I'm not talking of small amounts. Well, the companies are very big, they can bear it. Company like Shell put up a plant for gas to liquid in Middle East. $1 billion overrun and still problems. The same company decided to put up another gas to liquid plant in USA in spite of all these things. Said we have learned a lesson, we can make it a success. And they made it a success with the second plant. It all is a question of attitude and the ability of the engineers to work around a solution. That's the important part of it. To work around the solutions, find out how we can work around a solution and get over the issues.
Thank you, sir. Sir, the next question is from Dr. P.R. Naren. Can you give us your opinion on process simulations, use of software tools, especially for current generation students?
You see, one thing, my belief, I'm an old man, so my belief is in the old stuff. I mean, calculations using Excel sheets or whatever it is. Whenever you use this, and I've used this simulation tools, DWSIM especially, what we have found is, remember what are the assumptions behind it, behind this software. Because you can get absolutely wrong answers, and we have got them. If you don't know what is behind it, what is the equation of state you would use? You are doing PSRK, 3, what is that? Some equation, there are 3 or 4 equations available for a distillation system. What is the right equation to be used? If you use the wrong equation, you will get some absolute rubbish answer. But how do you distinguish whether it's a rubbish answer is something dependent on your experience and common sense? Because I always look at all these things and say, let me do a bit of manual calculation and see whether it makes sense or not. We have seen HTRI, which is a heat transfer this thing, absolutely wrong calculations for heat exchangers. We did it in our own way. Those heat exchangers are working. The HTR result was absolute rubbish. I mean, I'm not talking of small heat exchangers, I'm talking of heat exchangers of 500 and 1,000 square meters each. Yes. So, when you use simulation, remember what are the assumptions behind it. If you are clear about that, then there will be no issues. Yeah. And one major thing is, in a simulation, you can change all the conditions and get the results fast. Whereas in any other type of calculation, it will take you a long time to do it. So that's one big advantage of a simulation. We use simulations. I mean, I'm using simulations, absolutely no issue, but with a little bit of something back in the mind, let me be clear about it that this is the answer or not. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The next question is from Rajshri R, which reads, Sir, you have done a lot of projects and works involving different subjects or field. How do you keep yourself updated with the new innovations in every field?
Well, Google is so easy. It was very difficult earlier. I was subscribing for Chemical Engineering magazine. You won't imagine, as a private party, a private person, I was subscribing for certain magazines from USA to keep myself up to date in what is happening. Today, Google is there. And of course, all these publications are available. Some are at cost, some can be, you can get around them. All those applications are there. But I have one habit of looking at new issues that keep on coming. I mean, for example, the industrial and engineering chemistry, or some of these things, I keep on looking at it. And then I see this very interesting thing that, yes, okay, this is the way it is done, is it? Now let us take a look at it. I'll give you some idea of one thing which we found out. You can use a plasma reactor for producing acetylene from natural gas. Now, this is something which I found out. I mean, it is not there in any textbook and all that, but we found out, and then I made a study of it and I said, look here, this is one way of using natural gas without the heavy cost of a petrochemical plant. That's another subject, but then you keep on, there is no way of avoiding reading books and looking at all the time. I am a book reader or magazine reader, or now I go and see what are the, see for example this, when somebody said we want to make certain chemical, I said what's the use? It is used in solar power. I said what is it, solar power, why do you use a liquid? Then I went into the whole solar power system and found out this is the storage, liquid storage system. So if you have so much quantity can be stored. Now question is how do you improve upon it? This is one type of storage. There are four or five different types of storage chemicals. This is all redox. How it becomes redox. I mean, redox reactions. These are all reduction reactions. So once you go into that part of it, one thing you must know, when you do all these things, you must be fairly decently in the chemistry side of it also. It's not only engineering, but it is chemistry also, chemical engineering. When you go into this thing, you find chemistry is a necessity, this one. How do you see that celestite ore contains calcium, carbonate, strontium sulfate, barium sulfate. All are closely in the same, go back to your periodic table, one below the other. That means they've got so many common properties. How do you separate them? That is the way the mind works, that how do you separate them? What are the uncommon properties we can separate them? So this is the way I worked. Because normally barium is very difficult to separate, and all the specifications which you find abroad, they permit 0.5% to 1% barium in strontium chemicals. Whereas we produce strontium chemical with zero barium. Next question. Have I answered the question?
I guess yes, sir. Thank you so much. So the next question is from Jeffrey Ambroise. It reads, Good morning, sir. Myself, Jeffrey. I really admired on your passion and energy towards your profession. A great salute to you, sir. This is my question. What is your opinion in doing masters directly after UG, or we can do the core jobs, gain some experience, and then pursue masters?
Personally, I think if you want to be useful to the industry, if you want to be useful to this one, then I think you should spend a year or two in industry and then come back to your masters. Because then the industry's issues, you will understand then only the industrial issues. You have now understood the industrial issue. The other thing is, the professors must go to the industry, must spend industry 6 months, 3 months, going around the plant and looking at it in from different way. You see, I'll give an example of China. Their coal gasification is one big, huge thing going on. Now, there's a separate institute there which does this development, which they have done it, gasification of coal, lignite and all that. Now, the professor there who does this problem, he did all the things. I mean, of course, engineering is done by somebody else and all those things, but basically process design is done by them. When the plant starts up, he has to be present there during the startup. It's a 3,000 crore plant, but that professor, when I asked him that I'm coming to China and I want to meet him, he said, look here, there's a plant startup where we have done the basic design and I have to be present there for about 10 to 15 days. If there is any problems, I'll have to be solving those problems. I have to be present at the startup of the plant. So this is the difference. In fact, between China and India, there is a difference. Many Chinese company will tell you, we are getting help from such and such university. Next.
Yes, sir. The next question is again from Hariharan Shivakumar, which reads, for learning to do energy conversation, did you do any course separately on energy analysis, or was it just based on chemical engineering principles that you went ahead with? In other words, does one need certain certifications to work as a consultant?
No, there is no certification as a consultant, but now there is some certain things come up. You see, as far as energy conservation is concerned, I don't know if there's any certification and all that. There's no certification. Basically, you have to look at all the different parts in a chemical plant. You have to look at all the energy streams, high level energy, low level energy, what you can do with them and all those things. And then try to see whether you can exchange some of these energies and all those things. These are the things to be done. The other point you talk about certain certification is, if you are doing anything on safety and hazard, then there are certain certifications to be done. Because that is required by because you have got a legal obligation somewhere in the picture. You have audited, you have done a safety audit. If you have done a safety audit, you should be a certified safety auditor. There are certain things where you've got to have a license or a certain things. If you are doing, for example, some of the studies like this, safety audit or safety certification and all that, you have to have some basic licensing and certification. Otherwise, you can't do it. But as far as normal concerns like energy conservation and all that, it is up to you to apply your knowledge of what can be done with a high level energy stream and a low level energy stream. Can you go for three? See, for example, I give you the example of cogeneration. Simple firing of a boiler to a turbine steam boiler, 33% efficiency. If I co-generate steam, this is theoretically is there. I can get up to 80% or 90% efficiency. If I generate power and steam together and use this steam for heating purpose and power for power purpose. There's the third stage. If I use gas, I can first use a gas turbine. That's called a combined cycle. Then take these hot gases into the boiler and then do both get steam as well as power from there. But now when you come to this is combined, so you've got two stages. There's a third stage. Now you've got low level energy at 60 degrees and 50 degrees and 80 degrees centigrade. What do? What are you going to heat and cool? Then you can use that low level energy for refrigeration, provided you have a liquid that will boil and condense at 70 to 80 degrees centigrade. So it's called trigeneration, and it has been used. So when you do this trigeneration, the energy efficiency goes up to 93%. This is not something certified. This is what your idea is there, but once you know from 80 degrees, 100 degrees, I can condense the steam and get some heat. But if I got hot water at 60 degrees, what do I do? That is the problem. So then some innovative thinking has to be done, something has to be done. If it is possible, you can use hot water. If you have got some R33, one of these refrigeration R34A or something that will work with hot water, use it. But then that is a whole area of work which is quite different. But yes, that is one big area of research. How to use low level energy usefully. Next.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is from Kalaivanan SA. It reads, Sir, can you please give your opinion on hydrogen economy and its possibility to implement in India, given some economic and political obstacles?
No, let me tell you. I have been studying this hydrogen economy also somewhere. I am a little bit skeptical about it. The reason is this. From where do you get the hydrogen? So, what is the energy required for getting the hydrogen? What is your sources? If I want water, from water, I have to electrolyze it. Because hydrogen and oxygen is a very strong bond, very difficult to break. If I use natural gas, it means I am using natural gas. Where do I get the hydrogen from? But, so what is the cost of getting the nitrate hydrogen, and how do I store it, and how do I do it? I mean, the other point is, how do I store the hydrogen? And how do I transfer the hydrogen to some, say, if I want to use it for transportation or for some use? Now, there are big questions there. So let me tell you, just recently we have done some little work on it. There is a liquid which absorbs 600 ml of hydrogen per cc of 600 cc's of, I don't remember now, it's quite a large volume of hydrogen per gram of the liquid. So if I use that liquid and absorb the hydrogen, keep it in the liquid under small pressure, transport the liquid somewhere and heat it up, I'll get the hydrogen. So in this whole hydrogen cycle, one has to look at different forces. How do you transport the hydrogen? How do you make the hydrogen? The only justification which I can personally see is the source of generating hydrogen. If you want to use hydrogen for vehicles or other things in cities, is that you are reducing the pollution and you are shifting the pollution to a single point somewhere else where you can control it. Whereas in a city, you can't control it, there will be a limit to all the types of pollution. Whereas hydrogen economy is very good, and I read every month some article or other on the hydrogen economy and how it can be worked and how it makes sense. But ultimately, what is the cost? And mind you, the other point which you want to look at is, if you are making certain things, what is the energy you already spent in making those things? So all that, an entire gross picture has to be taken out to know whether what the hydrogen economy. But yes, one thing is clear: if you want to the pollution-free cities, then hydrogen is required. The question actually, how do you transport the hydrogen safely? So hydrogen is a very notorious problem. It will diffuse. If you have a cylinder of hydrogen, the hydrogen will diffuse through the steel. It will get empty. Everything is sealed. It will diffuse through 1 inch of steel. Next.
Yes, sir. The next question is from Shweta Saraswati, which reads, what were the challenges you had to face when you reached out to the VCs for funding, and what were their expectations?
You see, I did not have much of a problem with the VCs because they said, look here, one thing was those days the value of money was more. So what was the gold value also was less. So what we did in 50 lakhs, we would have to do it in 15 crores today. Price of cement was only 20 rupees a bag. The daily wages were 7 rupees and 8 rupees. So it was quite a different world. So the amount which we could attract was if 8 people giving about a lakh or couple of lakh or that's all. Nothing more we did to ask for more. Because what happens is once we have the base funding, because there's a project which is a viable project, profitable project. It's not something which is profitable in the future. It's something which is profitable now. So that's what we did. We approached the banks. They gave the money. Actually, my stake, even in the capital, I mean the share capital, our stake in was only 30%. The rest was all others. 70% was all others. But then we could get loan from the banks. The bank would give a loan only when a project is a viable project, even on paper. I mean, practically it should be viable, but on paper. So once you have a project that is viable, one is a venture capital is something you are terminating an idea, then going to make it profitable. That is venture capital. That is a very difficult story because that man must have taken the risk. He takes the risk on you. He takes the risk that if you mismanage it, there's a problem. You are only a technical person, so you must have other help also to manage the whole thing. All those part of the venture capital is you've got to have so many other factors coming into it. The point is you have a roadmap to reach commercialization of your idea. That is the basic thing about a venture capital. But it was not really a venture capital for me. It was already a project. We know that nitric acid is not produced in South India. I will be the only producer. So profitability was there. Where was the market? We could give a market and all those things. We were getting nitric acid all the way from Bombay. So there was basically a market, everything available. So that was easy. That was not really a venture capital. It was only a funding of a project.
Thank you, sir. So I would like to finish it off with this question. This is a personal question from my side. With your rich knowledge and experience, I would like to know your stance regarding the Sivagasi firecracker industry and the sterlite industry, sir.
Do you want to realize the truth? Okay, I will tell you. This is as far as the Shivagasi cracker industry is concerned. Initially, see, the difficulty is that people are not educated. The problems in this cracker industry is this one. Earlier, we used to use potassium chlorate. Potassium chlorate is now banned, and it took a long time to ban because potassium chlorate mixed with sulfur, you jump on your leather shoes, it will burn. Another thing was if you use potassium dichromate with these things, it is bound one day or other, you are bound to explode. Now this is something you are handling in this manner. Now take the Chinese or anybody. First of all, the equipment they use is very safe. Non-metals, non-sparking tools, all these are part of the game. The other thing is training of the people to correctly do it. Here it's a cottage industry. You are paying by the piece rate. Whereas there it's an organized thing. Makes a lot of difference in the safety standards to be used. They go by that method, crackers will become costly, no doubt. But anyway, now we don't know the real price of the cracker. The cracker says MRP 1,000, he gives you for 200, so we really don't know what is the cost. That's a different issue. The main fact is that This whole thing is run as a cottage industry on the basis of a poorly trained, low knowledge base. If the knowledge base is increased, I know some of the explosive inspectors who have been there, Tokashi and all that. They are saying, sir, how do we train these people? They don't want to be trained. They want to do it in this way. We have been doing for so many years, we'll do it like this. It becomes a very big obstacle. If the training is properly done, I don't think that many accidents can happen. Yes, these accidents can happen, but out of 20, we can expect 18 to be saved. 18 accidents will not take place. So this is the basic reason is because we run as a cottage industry and piece rate basis. There is no automation. You asked about this Sterlite. I am very clear that Sterlite is in violation of laws. The violations for a size of plant like Sterlite. I visited Sterlite many years back. I can tell you, they can spend some money on it and set right the whole thing. Absolutely no problem. I studied the entire process. I've gone through a lot of details. I've gone through EPA and other surveyed copper plants in USA and all that, and found out where the pollution issues are now, those things. The issue here in the case of Sterlite is, for such a large investment, why we are not going in for further investment into the safety side of it. Not safety, I would say the environmental side of it. It's myopic. It is myopic to think, I mean, okay, because of these various reasons, the plant is closed down, there's a different matter. But if it was any other, if it was really, and there are problems, I mean, I don't say that there are no pollution problems. Those pollution problems, all you will, after all, even a place like China has done it. I've gone through this Chinese company. Absolutely, they have taken care of it. In fact, the pollution control laws has changed so much in China now. They are far more stricter than in India, and their compliance is much, much better. The government is also, I mean, here the main point is, if there is a will, there is a way. As far as Sterlite is concerned, if there is a will, there is a way of making it perfectly safe, least polluting.
Yes, sir. So thank you for your accelerating talk, sir. It was really delightful and a splendid experience for us. Now, I once again call upon Ms. Rajshri to propose the vote of thanks.
I deem it a great honor and privilege to propose the vote of thanks on this memorable occasion. First of all, my sincere thanks to Almighty God for making today's event a triumphant success. I thank our special guest, Dr. Dev Mohan Mohanta, CEO, Commercial Chemical and Development Company, Chennai, who despite his busy schedule has found time to grace this occasion and enlighten us with words of knowledge and wisdom. I thank our Dean, Dr. K.S. Rajan, and Associate Dean, Dr. V. Punnusamy, for their wholehearted support for this event. My humblest thanks to our coordinator, Dr. P.R. Naren, for his guidance in hosting this grand event. I thank our faculty members for their valuable contribution and encouragement in all our efforts. I extend my thanks to all the alumni present here for their throughout support. My heartfelt thanks to the external participants for your contribution and participation. I also thank my friends and fellow students for your cooperation in making this event a splendid success. Thank you all.
Thanks.
We have come to the
Thank
end
you
of
very
this
much.
talk.
Thank you very
Yes,
much.
sir. Yes, sir. We have come to the end of this talk. I thank everybody involved in organizing and attending this lecture to make it a wonderful experience and a grand success. The recording will be stopped now. Thank you.
Thank you.